Hello, and welcome to my September wrap-up. I'm just going to dive straight into this. We're going to do this very quickly. I'm going to start with a DNF. So I was meant to read The Queens of Ynys Lear. This is a fantasy retelling of King Lear by Shakespeare, and I could not read this book. I got 160 pages into it and just made the decision, like, this book is not for me. It was too slow. Okay, this is going to sound weird, but it's true. It was too slow and it was too, action-based. I like reflective books. If Storygraph has taught me anything, it's that I like reflective books. This just wasn't it for me. It's not because it's fantasy. It's not because it's Shakespeare. It's not because it's walking a weird line between adult and YA. It's just not a book that I gelled with. So 160 pages in with a lot more pages, hundreds and hundreds of pages more to go, I just decided, no, not going to do it. A 2-star read was The Matrix, which I got on audio from my library, and yeah, it's 2 stars from me. I know it's getting so much hype. I had never read a Lauren Groff book before, and I don't know if this is like her norm or if it's just this book. I felt like she didn't tell the story. So there's a responsibility that comes with telling a fictionalized account of somebody who was real. And I don't feel like she picked up that responsibility, to tell the story as it happened. Now, I understand, artistic license and all of that, but I feel like she willfully avoided, key things in the life. Joey, stop. He's scratching the carpet. I'm sure you can hear it. This microphone picks up all the weird, other noises really loudly and not my voice so well. So, but anyway, I just feel like so much of what makes this person interesting in history, and I'm not saying who it is because you're going to read the book maybe, and, it's part of, the epiphanies are part of it, right? So, but there are key aspects of this individual's life that I feel like Lauren Groff purposefully downplayed, and they're the most interesting things about this person. So, she didn't write the book that I would have written, I guess. And so it just wasn't the book for me. I also did not like the writing style. It felt like I was aware all the time that I was listening to a book. This book was so in love with itself. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it makes perfect sense to me. The book was totally in love with itself, and never let me forget that it never let me escape into it. It held me at arm's length the entire time. Then I have 3 3-star reads, 2 of which I will be unhauling along with The Queens of Ynys Lear. First, the one I'm keeping. That would be My Brilliant Friend. I gave it 3 stars. I'm on the fence. It might be a 4-star, it might be a 2-star, and I'm still trying to process through it. The fact that I am still processing it tells me that it's probably going to be a solid 3 or 4-star. But I put it at a 3 because when I finished it, I had a lot of thoughts, but I didn't have a lot of, I had tons of questions. I didn't have a lot of answers, and I didn't know, and I still don't know, if I love it or I hate it. I think is how we're supposed to feel about one of the main characters. And I am compelled, it ends, if you've ever read these, you'll know that it ends on the middle of a story, kind of. It's not a cliffhanger exactly, but there is no resolution to anything. There's just no resolution. In the beginning of the book, we start in the present day, and something has happened, and so one of 2 friends sits down to write their relationship down, kind of in a vengeful way. She wants to record in great detail, the ins and outs of their relationship, the history of their relationship, their friendship. And we never circle back to that beginning time. The book ends, it then moves into memoir-esque type remembering, coming of age. first person and then leaves us there in the past, in the first person memoir, in the middle of an event. I am compelled to read the second book, but again, I don't know if I like the experience of reading them or not. Like, there's something really sinister about them. There's the book and the people. There's something really hard about the story, and yet it's also kind of clinical and removed. It lacks emotion, and yet it is writing only about intensely emotional experiences, highs and lows. It is not a healthy relationship, and yet you're rooting for it. It's a weird, complicated book, and I do think Elena Ferrante, is that how you say it? Elena Ferrante is a phenomenal writer, to leave me with so much discomfort and disruption and have me be interested in going back. But again, I don't know if I love it or I hate it. I still don't know, and I'm still thinking about it. And that says to me it's a really good book, but I hate it and I love it. I don't know. Have you read them? How do you feel about them? So I'm keeping that one, but it's currently a 3-star. Brothers on 3 was an arc that I received that I was super excited to read. This is a journalistic piece about a reporter who goes to State Reservation and records the true story. I'm just about to read it here. The true story of a family, resistance and hope on a reservation in Montana, revolving around like a basketball team and the kids on this basketball team. And so much of this wanted to be a triumph story, and it is, but Abe Streep, I think, is so afraid of, I think he's an anthropologist at heart, and I think he's so afraid of disrupting or misrepresenting or making meaning out of things through his white outsider lens, that while he's on this reservation, I think he does get totally emotionally involved, and he builds strong relationships with all of the people that he talks about in this book. Strong, healthy relationships that have conflict and joy and forgiveness. And yet when he's writing, I think he's so afraid to express any of that. He has his anthropology journalist lens on, or filter on, and so we lose all of the moments that could be intense or joyous or triumphant or heartbreaking. They're here, but they're very clinical. And so I truly enjoyed reading the story, but I hated the writing. I really, really hated the writing. And I think that in the hands of a different writer, this would have been a 5-star read for me. It is not. I want to make this clear. I am not judging or starring or rating the experiences or the lives of anybody in this. It is entirely the writing style, and I do understand, I think, why the writing is the way it is, but I think it's an overcompensation, and we lost something as a reading audience. I will not be keeping that. That'll go to a little free library. My next 3-star, my last 3-star read of the month, was Kitchens of the Great Northwest, a novel by J. Ryan Stradall. I picked this up at my library bookstore because I had read and absolutely loved The Logger Queens of Minnesota. Is that what it's called? Hang on, let's look. Yes, that's what it's called. The Logger Queens of Minnesota, which I got on audio from my library a few months back and listened to, and it took me by surprise and it took me by storm, and I absolutely loved it. And I realized that it was the second novel by J. Ryan Stradall. So when I saw Kitchens of the Great Northwest at my library bookstore for $2, I went ahead and bought it. I read it almost immediately. I read it the month after I bought it, and hated it. I've given it 3 stars, I think, out of sentimentality, but I really disliked this book. It is so I can see J. Ryan Stradall's writing style. I can feel their use of language, and I can see inklings of the novel that I'll love that comes next. But if I had read Kitchens of the Great Midwest before reading Lager Queens, I never would have picked up Lager Queens. Never. So if you have read The Kitchens of the Great Northwest and you feel that way, please pick up Lager Queens. It's an entirely different experience, but it still has that quirky, engaging writing style that Stradall has, and does well. Like, I think Stradall is an excellent writer, but the subject matter in this book was so intensely distressing. There are multiple storylines, they all interconnect, but they kind of read like independent short stories with characters that cross over. And they all are about life and death. And each in its own way is intensely distressing and dissatisfying. And I hated every minute of it. And I kept thinking, like, Lager Queens pulled through for me. Lager Queens was amazing. Lager Queens also had difficult situations and characters that experience a lot of emotional pain. But there is a sweetness and a hopefulness and a beauty to Lager Queens that is completely absent from Kitchens of the Great Midwest. And I'm still trying to figure out, I know the message the book is giving, and I won't say it because it would be an absolutely huge spoiler in case you want to read it. I can't get on board with that message coming from a man. Because essentially, this is the story of a woman who abandons her child. And I probably wouldn't have chosen to read the book even if I knew that. If I'd known that was the case, I probably wouldn't have chosen to read the book. But I didn't know that, and I did read it, and it is about that. But there's a lot of other things that happen. And there's a lot of justification for making decisions that harm others. I don't know. You could argue, and I've tried to alleviate some of my own mental anguish with this book, that he's just observing life. He's just observing humanity. You can argue that, but I really feel like he is giving us some kind of fable, and I don't agree with his message, and I don't think it's a very masculine, patriarchal take on motherhood. So in that way, I guess it's a unique book for our day and age. And I won't say I found it offensive. I just found it disappointing and inauthentic and incredibly devastating. Just devastating. So I do not recommend this one, and I will be I will be unhauling this one to a little free library near me. I will absolutely read the next thing that J. Ryan Stradall puts out, but that was a happy accident that I read his second book first, because it is leaps and bounds more my kind of book than Kitchens of the Great Midwest. I would never have continued to read him if that had been the first book I read by him. So, happy accident. Now for my 4 stars. A lot of 4 and 5 stars this month. First off, I won't say much. The next Irish Doctor book, An Irish Doctor in Peace and at War. We were in World War II, lots of German measles talk. My next 4-star read was How Do You Live? Is a classic Japanese, middle grade novel. Talk about fable. That's what this is. This is a series of fables. And I kind of felt like it was Sophie's World for Japanese preteens. In it, you have a boy who is growing up and he's learning lots of different lessons, and he's got this really involved uncle who he can have these kind of philosophical conversations with. They write letters and journal entries, and they speak to each other. Each chapter details a different life lesson that he's learning, and the lesson is demonstrated for you, or the need for the lesson is demonstrated for you through stories about his interactions with his friends and at school, the conclusions that he comes to about what it means to be alive what it means to be human, what it means to live in community. Yeah, it's just really fascinating. It reveals a lot, I think, about Japanese culture. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. I do think that the pacing is a little bit weird, and I'm going to chalk that up not to the original, but to the translation. This is the first time that it's been translated into English, and this is a new release, and I actually had to get this from Book Depository because it's not released in the States yet. By the way, British books are so gorgeous. Why can't American books do this more often? It's just so beautiful. Every time I bite the bullet and order something from Book Depository or Blackwell's, I just am floored by the care and the exquisite beauty that has gone into this book. It is a thing of art, and it doesn't cost any, shipping costs more, but the book itself doesn't cost any more than if I were to purchase it here from an independent bookstore. Yeah, I just, wake up, America. Come on. Make books beautiful. They're beautiful. Next, this was a carryover, a crossover from August into September. I finished this right away. In September. This is How to Talk to a Goddess and Other Lessons in Real Magic by Emily Croy Barker. It is the second book, the long anticipated second book, the companion novel to The Thinking Woman's Guide to Real Magic, which I always forget how to start that title. The Thinking Woman's Guide to Real Magic, which I absolutely loved, have read it multiple times, was the first real fantasy book that I got into, and this was by the same author. It's 10 years in between, no time passes here, but 10 years have passed between the writing of the two novels, and she feels like a different writer, kind of. I think she's improved in her plot development, but this feels like a very traditional novel. It follows a very traditional path. It feels very much like I could easily chart this on a hero's journey chart. And the original, the first book in the series, was quirky and weird and wild and all over the place, and you could never predict what was going to happen. And then it left you on this gigantic cliffhanger. Well, everything is neatly wrapped up in this one, and it's really it's like you're walking across, walking on stones across a lake. You know exactly where you're going, and there's nothing to trip you up. So I'm happy to have the story concluded. But I didn't get the same joy out of this book that I got out of the first one. But if I consider them together, the story trajectory was very satisfying, and out of sentimentality for my absolute adoration of the first weird and wild and wonderful book, not feeling anything particularly passionate at all about this one, I'm giving it 4 stars. It's probably more of a 3-star read, but personal experience, I'm going to give it 4 stars. It is a long book. It takes a long time to get through it. It's enjoyable. It just doesn't evoke any strong reactions at any moment. That's all. Okay. I'm so pleased to be able to have a Trollope on my 4-star pile. I have been working my way since January through the Barsetshire Chronicles, and I have been struggling with them. I do not think that Trollope is a writer that I gel with at all, and I have really struggled with that because I think that so many of his premises are incredibly interesting. I think that he does capture Victorian life. I think that there are moments in almost every book where he has had me laughing out loud with a funny quip or exchange between usually a male and a female, and yet I just feel so dulled by his writing. I go into a stupor as I read his books, and except for The Warden, which I loved The Warden until the end, and I had a very violent dislike of that book. Still do. On the end of that book. But then, the next book picks up where that one left off, and I still strongly suggest you read the two as one book, and you'll feel a lot better about life. But After that, every book has been like a 2 or 3 star read for me. I've given them 3 stars because, you know, I gotta respect the longevity, and the sheer like amount of work that this man put out. But this one, The Small House at Allington, I can finally say it's a 4-star read for me. I really, really enjoyed it, and it surprised me. But from the very first chapter, something felt different about it. Something felt lighter, less plotting. Now, I will say that I think that it could have been about 250 pages shorter and we wouldn't have lost anything. But I think that's just Trollope. He's either super short and concise or super long and meandery. This was less meandery, but it does still have like multiple storylines going on at once. It's the story of 2 sisters who live in the small house, not the manor house, at Allington. And it starts out as kind of like how to match them. Who will they marry? They're kind of low on the social scale, but independently as human beings, they're quite good catches. And so who will be acceptable? Who's an acceptable match? And so it's a little bit about their love story. They're 2 very different sisters, but it's kind of their love stories, but then some other really interesting storylines start to happen that you don't anticipate at all, so I won't ruin it for you. Next book, 4 stars. Finding Fraser. It got 4 stars from me because it's highly enjoyable. It's super fun, but it's completely unbelievable, and the narrator is a little bit overly whiny. I think I am going to unhaul this one because I just don't think I'll ever read it again. But I super enjoyed it. It was very fun. I looked forward to picking it up every day. I couldn't predict what was going to happen. It's told as a series of blog posts and about a woman who leaves it all behind to go to Scotland to try to find her own Fraser. She's totally obsessed with Outlander. So yeah, it was fun. Then I read this one, The Royals Next Door, which I really loved, but cannot widely recommend because it does have some very steamy romance in it. You can feel free to skip it. That's not something that you like to read. The story itself was really great, and the writing, Karina Halley, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I've never read anything by her before. I really liked her writing style. She's telling the story of a teacher who lives in the carriage house or coach house of a big estate in, I think, Long Island. If not Long Island, somewhere around there. With her mom, who has some neurodiversity issues, some anxiety issues. She also herself, the main character, is neurodiverse. And the author is neurodiverse. So this is an Own Voices novel, but there is some disruption to their lives when the prince and princess of England move in and next door. They purchase the big house that the carriage house is attached to because they want to. I mean, it's very much Harry and Meghan, and for that I judge because it felt like a really lazy move on the part of the author, because although they're not called Harry and Meghan, they are very clearly Harry and Meghan. And I mean, if you're going to write a fictional book, please just actually write some fiction, because that whole set of characters was meh. But she's not really interested in them. She's interested in their bodyguard. So it's the relationship that forms between her and the bodyguard. She's a teacher, and I feel like she really rings true as a teacher. And the writing was really great. The love story was really great. It's not insta-love. It is kind of animosity to love. Mostly because he just gets in her way, right? He's there and he's a symptom of what's stopping her from taking care of the things that she needs to take care of in her life. Including her mother. So it was a delightful read. And I would recommend it high and low, but I know that I have some former students that watch this channel, and I know that I have some people with some religious backgrounds that won't feel comfortable with reading that, and I know that I have people who will read anything as well. So just no judgment on my part. It is what it is, but just know that there are some graphic scenes that don't move the story forward that you could skip over if you're interested in reading the book, but they're there. Just knowledge is power. The next one that I read was Mrs. Robinson's Disgrace, The Private Diary of a Victorian Lady by Kate Summerscale. Now, Kate Summerscale, this was my make it or break it for Kate. So I read The Wicked Boy and absolutely loved it, thought it was super phenomenal. And then I read the one that I can never even remember the title of, but her most recent one about spiritualism and the woman who claims to be haunted or possessed. And in the pre-war, in between the wars, in between World War I and II in England. And I can't remember what it's called, and I don't even care. But I disliked that one. I thought it was disorganized, hard to follow, and inconclusive. So I picked up Mrs. Robinson's Disgrace to read to find out, am I going to want to read more Kate Summerscale, or was The Wicked Boy just a one-off phenomena for me? And I really enjoyed Mrs. Robinson's Disgrace. It is about patriarchy, and it is about whether or not women have the right to have passionate emotions, or to feel things strongly, or to have an imagination, or to have privacy. Like, the very basic idea of privacy. Is a woman allowed that? And it's like all of her other books, it's the deconstruction of a real event. I was already aware of this event, so I was really just free to look at her interpretation of the events and the connections that she was making to other ideas, and found it really well done. I'm shaking here. Found it really well done and really fascinating. And yeah, I will read more Kate Summerscale. I think that this brand new book that I disliked, I might even give that a reread and see if in a different locale, in a different time in my life, if I like it a little bit more and I feel a little less judgmental of it. But I'm going to read the other couple of books that she's written already that I haven't read before I do that. My camera, for some reason, the table is really shaky, and so I'm going to let go of the camera now, but we might start shaking again, so. Yep, there it goes. I don't know if you'll be able to tell, but it just kind of bobbles a little bit. Okay, 5-star reads. An Unorthodox Match by Naomi Reagan. I loved this book. This is a Orthodox Jewish romance. So this lapsed Jewish woman wants to return to that community. She's tried other things. She's dealing with grief and difficult parent relationships, and she wants stability, and she kind of wants the peace of knowing the rules, right? And so she wants to join a rather strict Orthodox group of Hasidic Jews, and I think they're Hasidic, in New York. And she still has the smell of the outside world on her, kind of. But she ends up through a series of events babysitting the children of this Jewish scholar whose wife has died. And there are some mysterious circumstances surrounding that death. I won't go into it. It's part of the storyline, and you will enjoy reading about that. And it's kind of how they all change each other's lives. They change each other's ideas of right and wrong. The book has long discussions that are not boring at all, that move the plot forward, but long philosophical discussions about tradition and innovation, about the existence of God, about faith, about predestination versus free will, about personal choice, and just about love and relationships, and it's beautiful. It's a truly, truly beautiful, thought-provoking romance novel. Like, it follows, it's got the meet cute, it's got the let's introduce the female and then let's introduce the male, or, you know, it's got all of the things that you need. It's got the, this isn't going to work out, and oh, look, it does. Like, it follows every single, like, formulaic thing. And yet it's also this really deeply philosophical study of grief and hope, and guilt and freedom. It's really wonderful. It's a really, really wonderful book with very well developed characters. Yeah, highly, highly, highly recommend it. And I would like to read more by this author. I'd never heard of her before, but loved it. Read this one, The Fair Fight. This had been on my bookshelf for quite a long time. The Fair Fight by Anna Freeman. This was a 5-star read for me. It's told through the 3 different narrators who all become intertwined, though they don't start out intertwined. And I really, really loved the 2 female narrators and kind of detested and skimmed through the male narrator. But the 2 women's perspectives were really, really phenomenal. And they all come from different stations in life. They all have different baggage. They all have different difficulties and triumphs, different goals and perspectives. But ultimately, it's a story of how they're kind of all the same and how their lives affect each other. It takes place in 1700s Bristol. It does tell a history that I did not know about women fighting, about female pugilism. Really interesting. It is violent. It is a violent book in a lot of different ways. Physical violence, emotional violence, but it's also beautiful. So it's like that fight between violence and peace. Then I read 2 5-stars from my friend Dickens. Oh my gosh. I've been kind of getting like totally over reading my Dickens for the year. I've been reading Dickens. If you're new here, or if this is the first time you're seeing one of these wrap-ups from me, I've been reading all the Dickens that I'd never read, which is most of Dickens this year in chronological order. And this month I read 2 because the 2 equaled 1, really. And it was Hard Times, which was a reread for me, but I counted it as a not having read because the last time I read it was more than 2 decades ago in my freshman year of college for a history class. And then I read A Tale of Two Cities, which was also a reread for me, but I counted it as a never having been read because the last time I read it, I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I read this really beautiful hardback version that I don't have anymore that my Aunt Donnell gave to me for Christmas one year. But I read these 2, and they're both 5-star reads for me. I absolutely loved them. I mean, I don't think I have to tell you much about A Tale of Two Cities, but this book, like, just this book. The storyline is amazing. The writing, though, the writing of this book, the plotting, like, I mean, if Dickens had lived today and was writing these kind of satiric, like maybe he'd be David Sedaris, I don't know, but like if he was writing this kind of like cynical, farcical stories with these weird characters and these heartbreaking circumstances, and he didn't have to be paid, you know, if he wasn't being serialized, all of his novels would probably have these beautiful, like, commentary tied up in tight plot with awesomely appropriate character development. Like, character development is less so in here because this is a theme this month, but this is like a fable, right? And character development in this, it's not that long and it's beautiful, but it's so precise and glorious. Now, I did read some up on this novel about, I'm kind of trying to wait until I've read them all. And then in January, I have a biography that I want to read about Dickens. I already know his life. I've read a couple of other biographies in the past. This is a brand new one that came out this year. And also commentary on all the novels. But the commentary book that I chose talks about all of them like kind of at once, which is what I was looking for. I didn't just want to read just about A Tale of Two Cities in isolation. I wanted to read about his work as a whole. So I've got that, and I'm going to read it after I finish reading all of the books. But I did go online and read a little bit about this one and the background. And I do know that this is written like, and that one of the characters, no spoilers in case you've never read it, but one of the characters is one of my favorite characters, and she's based on the woman who is actually rumored to be Dickens's mistress, the young actress. And he's, started his campaign to kind of be freed from his wife at this point in his life, and he's been dropped from his previous publisher, so he starts his own magazine and prints this as kind of a slap in the face, or a you can't break me and I can make my own life decisions kind of move. And it does very well, of course, because it's Dickens, and it starts his new literary magazine. Knowing all of that and seeing like what Passion produced makes me conflicted about it. I absolutely love it though. I love it so much. I wanted to reread it the moment that it ended. I wanted to watch a good film adaptation. Why are there no good film adaptations of this book? We need a new version of Tales of Two Cities. If you've never read this, I strongly suggest you read this. I also loved Hard Times, but it's much more, like I said, it's much more of a fable. It's much more of a lesson book. Like, it is, everything in it is a vehicle to talk about the horror of the Industrial Revolution and industrialization. And also, it's a great commentary on school and childhood, because imagination is outlawed. and you see the repercussions of that. And you get the connection between the outlaw of imagination and creativity and the need for mindless workers to keep the machine going. It feels very Kafka-esque, Hard Times, but it's definitely got that stamp of Dickens on it. So it's an interesting book. I really loved both of them. There are two books that are so it seems weird to say this about Tale of Two Cities, but there are two books that are so not characteristically Dickens. And I read them both in the same month, and I loved them so much. Like, they were so refreshing. I just loved them. Anyway, more about Dickens later. I'm about to finish up. I only have a couple more left, and then I will do a ranking of the books. And I think people are going to be upset. They're going to be surprised, because some of the most hated books by the general public are some of my absolute favorites that I read this year for the first time. And I've got my reasons. I got reasons. But anyway, I've got 4 more books on my 5-star stack. So I read Etta and Otto and Russell and James by Emma Hooper. I read this because this is the first novel by Emma Hooper, and last month I read my first novel from her, which was Our Homesick Songs, which is now one of my favorite books of all time, and this did not disappoint. This is a melancholy, sad, hopeful book. It has the exact same lyrical tone and voice, but it is a completely different story from Our Homesick Songs. Well, I say that. It might be the same story, but it's told in a completely different way, in a completely different space and time, with completely different characters. But it's still about mourning and love and loss and knowing when to let go. There's magical realism in this one, which was really, really fun. And the sadness of the ending took me a little bit by surprise, but it's very gentle, and you're eased into it, and you go, oh, and every realization about what you've been reading and why just washes over you. And I bawled. I just cried and cried and cried, because it was so beautiful, and it was so true, and it was so sad, and it was so hopeful, and it was so loving. And I'm not telling you anything about the plot except this. This 84-year-old woman, Etta, wakes up one day and leaves a note for her husband saying she's going to the sea because she's never seen the sea. And she takes, by foot, she walks. She leaves everybody behind. And she makes, or she doesn't make a friend. A coyote chooses her. And the coyote is kind of the voice of reason a little bit. So that's Etta, Otto, Russell, and James. but it's nothing of the story that you are about to read. I just really love Emma Hooper. I love her writing. I love the way that she tells these stories. I love the way that she packages really distressing things that are part of everyday life. She's just phenomenal and beautiful, and I love her. Read her. Read Emma Hooper. Get your hands on either one of her books that are out right now. Wait expectantly for her next book that hasn't even been talked about yet, and love her. She's amazing. Next, I have a collection of essays called A Paris All Your Own, Best-Selling Women Writers on the City of Light. I think there were 34, 40 essays in here, some very short, some a little bit longer, all by best-selling women authors, their relationship with Paris. And some of those relationships are positive and some are negative, but they're all super interesting. And this is mostly authors that I've never read. They're authors that you would know, like the woman who wrote The Paris Wife. The editor wrote The Weird Sisters, which I have on my shelf and I've read half of but never finished. But this book made me want to read every single one of these authors' works. So that might be a future plan for me. But yeah, I just loved it. Each author's voice was so distinct, and each essay was so different from all the others. Each experience, each perspective on Paris was so different. I mean, you've got stories that are about like how they got there and they hated it and they packed up and they left early, and you've got stories about how they loved Paris so much that it ruined marriages, and you've got stories about how Paris helped people become who they are. Just really, really beautiful. I don't even think you have to like Paris to like this. This is just a series of stories about people, and yeah, really, really loved it. Then I read Parallel Lives. This is a book that I'd had on my shelf for a really long time. This is 5 Victorian Marriages by Phyllis Rose. Each chapter, there's 5 chapters, and each chapter is the story and analysis of a Victorian marriage, and they're all somebody who you would know, like George Eliot or they're all somebody you would know, but it's just kind of like that dynamic, the male-female dynamic, and how Victorian society affected that relationship in both positive and negative ways. What happens when you have a very strong-willed woman in the Victorian era? Like, that seems to be a theme. I don't think it was an intentional theme, but I think from the couples that were chosen, and I think that if you have a lot of firsthand documentation from a female about their marriage from the Victorian period, you know you have a strong-willed Victorian woman, because the passive ones, you know, their voices unfortunately they don't remain, right? So yeah, so you know, there's some intrinsic bias worked into just, you know, the information that's available, but it was really, really fascinating. Loved it. Just my kind of thing. If you're not interested in Victorian era or Victorian social norms, it probably isn't the book for you, but if that is of any interest to you at all, then I highly recommend it. It's an older book, but very well done. And then I read Forever Young, a memoir by Hayley Mills, and I still have a list to finish watching, but I watched as I read the movies that she's talking about. So I discovered all kinds of movies that I didn't even know she was in. I mostly knew her from her association with Disney, but of course that's not the only set of films that she made, right? Her British art house pieces, I mean, she is not the Pollyanna that we know in the States, right? She's a real serious actress, and it's amazing. It's really, really great. And the thing is that it just kind of comes natural to her. Like, she grows up in a family where, you know, she has a father who is a famous actor. Her sister goes into acting on the stage. Her mom is a playwright, but also very dramatic. So she comes by her skill naturally, right? But it's never been something that was pushed on her or anything. She just kind of gets offered, a family friend offers her first acting role in a movie called Tiger Bay, which you should watch. It's on YouTube and really excellent and disturbing. But she's just a kid, and he's just watching her. He's there to talk with her father about the script, because her father is in the movie as well. And they know they have to cast this kid, and they happen to be watching her and her siblings play, and he's like, that's our kid. Just because of her natural sassy self. It's really a very gentle, very reminiscing, very honest, very forgiving, not sensationalizing at all, but not shying away from or not talking about certain things. Just really, really lovely, wonderful. I like Hayley Mills even more than I did as just, the Disney character in my childhood imagination. I like her even more now as this fleshed out person, this human being, who lived this life, right? So great, so great. That's it. That's all I read in September. That is 19 books, which is way shorter than what I've been reading. It's my second shortest pile of read books since January, and that's all good. That's okay. It's still an awful lot of books, I know, for people who read two or five books a month or whatever. I'm gonna be there because I'm starting my master's in English, and I've got a lot of reading to do for that. So my reading might slow down quite a bit, although I seem to find a way. I always seem to find a way to escape into a good book. So we'll see what happens. I mean, again, never say never. But yeah, it's still a lot of books, but it's fewer books than I have been averaging. So you can tell that it was a very busy month. September, I went back to work in my classroom, full-time in person during a pandemic when the group of kids that I'm working with, most of them are not old enough to be vaccinated, but they are in a building full of people who are vaccinated, and just really being of an age where they don't fully comprehend everything. They're sixth graders, right? So they know and understand enough to challenge, but not to follow. And so it's not been fun. It's been extremely stressful, and it doesn't feel like teaching at all. It doesn't feel like a good social environment. I mean, I don't know what the options are, but this doesn't feel right. So that's all I will say about that. But it has been hard and stressful and time consuming, and disheartening. And I feel like I'm constantly having to say and enforce things that I don't and allow things that I don't believe are best choices. So I feel like my integrity is being fractured. Yeah, I don't know. So I decided to start a master's in English. I've always wanted a master's in English, and I just never did it. And I've taught English and humanities for 22 years, and I've taught myself a lot, and I've taken a lot of one-off courses and MOOCs and all sorts of things, and I've learned a lot from my peers. I am an excellent teacher, and I will have been teaching most of the information that I will be learning. I'm excited for history of language and linguistics, and to dive more deeply into syntax and things like that, but which I haven't formally studied with anyone. I've read books, but I feel like I've kind of learned all of that in a vacuum, and I will be very excited to study that more. But yeah, for now, spooky reads, Victober reads, some cozy fall reads, lots of reads for school, some that I really hate that I have to go deep into, like Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. That'll be a struggle, but I'll try to make the most of it. Anyway, enjoy your fall day. Happy October reading, and Thanks for watching.